At 8:13 Monday morning, my brother arrived at our parents' house with a locksmith, 2 movers, and a will I had never seen before. He'd changed every lock and told the neighbors the property legally belonged to him now. What Daniel didn't know was that our father hid a second set of probate documents inside the cedar desk he removed before I arrived. At 4:52 p.m., the estate attorney opened a sealed file that turned my brother's confidence into visible panic. At 8:13 Monday morning, 3 days after my parents' funeral, my brother stood on the front porch with a locksmith, 2 movers, and a document folder balanced beneath his arm. Like he'd been preparing for this longer than grief should allow. Rain darkened the stone walkway in uneven patches, while the movers carried furniture across the wet grass without speaking. The sound of metal tools against the front lock echoed louder than the church bells had on burial day. Daniel barely looked at me when I stepped out of my car. "The revised will transferred the house to me," he said calmly. "Dad finalized everything before the hospital." The words sounded rehearsed, not emotional, administrative. Across the street, Mrs. Hargrove pretended to trim already perfect hedges while watching through the branches. Another neighbor slowed his morning walk without fully stopping. Public humiliation always looked quieter in wealthy neighborhoods. People avoided eye contact, so they wouldn't feel responsible for what they witnessed. I walked past Daniel toward the open front door before the locksmith blocked the entrance with an apologetic expression. "Sorry, ma'am. I was instructed." "She still has belongings upstairs," Daniel interrupted. "But we need everything removed before noon." Before noon. Like grief had a deadline. Inside the entryway, the family photos had already been rearranged. Pictures of Daniel's children sat centered along the hallway table while older photographs of me had disappeared entirely. The absence felt more deliberate than if they had been shattered. The probate letter sat folded on the passenger seat beside me while rain gathered across the windshield in slow, uneven lines. Formal estate review scheduled within 14 days. Mandatory attendance required for all named beneficiaries. The wording felt colder than grief should feel. But colder things had always survived longest inside our family. By the time I returned to the house, half the living room was already empty. The spaces where furniture once stood looked pale against the hardwood floors. Entire photo frames had disappeared from the walls, leaving small, clean rectangles behind like memories removed with surgical care. Daniel stood in the dining room, speaking quietly into his phone about contractors, insurance transfers, and property timelines while movers carried boxes toward the trucks outside. It wasn't new behavior, just larger. Daniel received renovation money when he claimed the kitchen needed modernization. My father called it an investment. When Daniel's business struggled 3 years later, another private loan appeared quietly, through family accounts nobody discussed openly. At birthdays, holidays, anniversaries, Dad praised Daniel's leadership instincts, while I became the dependable daughter, who supposedly asked for nothing. Independent, practical, easy. Families sometimes confuse low maintenance with low importance. Near midnight I walked through the upstairs hallway holding a flashlight. Because several lamps had already been removed, the house sounded unfamiliar without furniture softening the noise. Every footstep echoed longer than it should have. Then my phone vibrated. The message came from Marianne, my father's former caregiver. "Your father knew this would happen." Another message appeared seconds later. "He told me to contact you only if Daniel tried to rush the estate process." I stared at the screen while cold air moved through the half-open stairwell window. Below me, the house remained dark except for the dining room where Daniel had left a single light burning, beside stacks of legal folders. For the first time since the funeral, grief stopped feeling accidental. It began feeling organized. Then I noticed something worse. Dad's cedar desk was gone. The desk had sat beside the library window for 32 years. He kept tax files in the left drawer and sealed Documents beneath the false bottom. He once showed me during a thunderstorm when I was 11. Daniel knew that, which meant he removed it first. Rainwater dripped from my coat sleeve as I turned toward the brass mailbox near the porch steps. Several unopened probate letters remained inside, their edges swollen slightly from damp air. One large envelope rested beneath them, stamped with county probate markings. Both siblings must appear for formal review. My name appeared first. Daniel saw me reading it. For the first time that morning, his composure shifted. Just slightly. His jaw tightened while the movers continued carrying boxes behind him. "That letter came by mistake," he said too quickly. I looked at him carefully then. Not angry, not grieving, nervous. And suddenly the house no longer felt taken from me. It felt hidden from me. I met Marianne the next afternoon at a quiet diner 2 towns away from the house. She kept glancing toward the windows before speaking. Like caution had followed her long after my father died. "He stopped trusting Daniel near the end," she said softly, wrapping both hands around untouched coffee. "Especially after the paperwork started." The word paperwork settled heavily between us. Marianne explained that during my father's final months, Daniel visited constantly with folders, signature tabs, and revised estate documents. Some days Dad signed papers without reading closely because medication left him exhausted. Other days he refused entirely and accused Daniel of changing valuations and property language after meetings with attorneys. He thought someone was trying to rush him, Marianne said. The last week, he became very specific about protecting records. I felt cold suddenly despite the heat inside the diner. Marianne lowered her voice further. "The duplicate estate files were hidden inside the cedar desk. Your father made me promise not to tell anyone unless something happened after the funeral." The cedar desk? The one Daniel removed first. Outside? Rain tapped softly against parked cars while my phone vibrated again across the table. Another message from Daniel. "You need to surrender occupancy rights immediately." Then another. "This gets much uglier if attorneys stay involved." I stared at the screen longer than necessary. Not once had he written anything about grief, or family, or our parents. Only timelines, rights, transfers. Marianne noticed my expression and shook her head slowly. "Your father expected pressure," she said. "That's why he hid copies." For the first time, Daniel's confidence stopped looking legitimate in my mind. It began feeling rehearsed, like someone trying to stay ahead of consequences already moving toward him. Before leaving, Marianne handed me a folded moving invoice she'd taken from the kitchen trash. The morning after the funeral. Storage facility number included. Same-day removal authorized by Daniel Mercer. I read the address twice. The cedar desk hadn't been destroyed. It had been hidden. The storage facility sat behind an abandoned furniture outlet near the interstate. Hidden between chain-link fencing and rows of identical gray doors, Daniel rented the unit through his business account 6 weeks earlier. According to the woman behind the front desk, who barely glanced at my father's death. Notice before unlocking the file records. Unit 214. The cedar desk waited near the back wall, beneath a canvas sheet. For a moment I couldn't move. The desk still smelled faintly like my father's office, cedar oil, old paper, and the peppermint lozenges he kept in the top drawer for years. Daniel had emptied most of the visible files, but he either forgot or never discovered the false bottom compartment. Dad showed me when I was 11. My hands shook slightly as I pressed the hidden latch beneath the center drawer. Inside sat duplicate wills, unsigned transfer forms, hidden debt notices folded beneath bank envelopes stamped final demand. I opened document after document while fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Daniel's businesses were collapsing faster than anyone inside the family understood. Overdue commercial loans, missed restructuring payments, foreclosure warnings tied to investment properties. I'd never heard him mention publicly. Then I found letters from foreclosure attorneys addressed directly to him. Past due, immediate action required. The timeline explained everything. Daniel wasn't grieving the house, he needed the house, needed the estate liquidated quickly. Enough to stop financial collapse. Already closing around him. Near the bottom of the compartment rested a sealed envelope in my father's handwriting. Elena, if Daniel pressures you, delay everything. The sentence felt less like advice and more like preparation. I sat alone beside the cedar desk while trucks moved faintly outside. Beyond the storage walls, for years, Daniel had been treated as the successful child, the dependable one, the future of the family, but hidden beneath legal folders and property records was a different version entirely. One built on debt, panic, and borrowed time. At the bottom of the probate packet, clipped behind the duplicate wills, another notice confirmed the estate review date, 9 days remaining. For the first time since the funeral, the countdown no longer frightened me. It frightened Daniel. That evening, he sent a family-wide message, announcing a memorial dinner at the house, to restore unity during a difficult time. I read it twice beside the open cedar desk. Families usually hold memorial dinners for grief. Daniel was holding one for appearances. The memorial dinner began precisely at 7, with catered food arranged beneath, soft lighting and carefully lowered voices that made the entire evening feel rehearsed. Before guests even arrived, Daniel greeted relatives near the front hallway, wearing the same navy suit from the funeral, shaking hands, like a man hosting a corporate reception. Instead of mourning our parents, every conversation sounded managed. Daniel repeated the same stories about Dad's final wishes. 2 different guests almost word for word while subtly reminding everyone how emotionally overwhelmed I had been since the funeral. Twice, I caught relatives lowering their voices after he mentioned my difficulty accepting change. The performance would have worked better if he looked less tired. Dark circles shadowed beneath his eyes now. His smile appeared half a second too late whenever someone mentioned probate. Near the dining room entrance, Aunt Valerie touched my arm quietly while servers refilled wine glasses around us. "Did your father ever mention the second appraisal?" she asked softly. I kept my expression neutral. "What second appraisal?" Her face shifted immediately with regret, like she realized she'd said too much. Across the room, whispers drifted between cousins about unpaid property taxes and refinancing notices. Arriving after the funeral, Daniel moved faster each time conversations lowered near him, inserting himself before questions could fully form. Then came the toast. Daniel lifted his glass and began speaking about honoring family legacy. But midway through the speech he referenced the revised will finalized in April. The room fell subtly still. Dad had still been hospitalized in April, and according to the probate notice, the official amendment timeline listed June. Tiny details destroy people more effectively than screaming ever does. Several relatives exchanged brief, uncomfortable glances before quickly looking away. Daniel noticed. For the first time all evening, his composure slipped completely, and suddenly the dinner no longer felt like a memorial. It felt like damage control. The probate hearing began at 9:04 Thursday morning inside a conference room that smelled faintly of paper, old carpet, and burnt coffee. No one raised their voice. No dramatic accusations filled the room. The atmosphere felt colder than anger could ever become. Professional, permanent. Daniel arrived with 2 attorneys and a gray folder, thick enough to suggest preparation. But his confidence looked thinner now. He avoided eye contact while probate officials organized exhibits across the long oak table beneath fluorescent lights. The review moved methodically through evidence, conflicting wills, duplicated property filings, timeline discrepancies between hospital records and signature dates, hidden debt tied to Daniel's business accounts, overdue refinancing obligations connected to properties, already under lender review. One attorney questioned why estate transfers accelerated during our father's final medical decline. Another highlighted inconsistencies in notarization records. Daniel's lawyers kept repeating words like misunderstanding and clerical overlap, but the language sounded increasingly fragile against documented timelines projected across the screen. Then came testimony from Mary Ann. She spoke calmly about repeated pressure during Dad's final months, about folders appearing beside medication trays, about arguments overheard through partially closed bedroom doors. Daniel stared downward the entire time, but the room changed completely when the probate officer introduced the final exhibit, original estate recording, recorded 11 months prior. The screen flickered softly before my father appeared seated behind the cedar desk, wearing his reading glasses and the dark green sweater he always kept near the library during winter. He looked tired, but clear. If coercion, financial manipulation, or undue pressure is discovered regarding the property, he said evenly, ownership of the family residence transfers entirely to Elena Mercer. No one moved. My father folded his hands slowly before continuing. Daniel measures stability through control. Elena measures it through responsibility. Those are not the same thing. Across the table, Daniel's face lost color completely. Then Dad delivered the final sentence. This clause exists because I believe pressure may come after my death. The silence afterward felt absolute, not emotional, final. For years Daniel had behaved like the inevitable heir, the successful son, the child my parents trusted most with financial decisions and family legacy. But hidden inside the estate structure was a safeguard, designed specifically against him. The probate officer closed the file carefully. Formal fraud review pending. Asset transfers temporarily frozen. Property ownership awarded to Elena Mercer, effective immediately. Daniel leaned back slowly in his chair like someone realizing collapse had already happened long before the hearing began. And for the first time since the funeral, I stopped feeling like the child left outside the house. I finally understood my father had been leaving it to me all along. 3 weeks after the probate hearing, the funeral flowers finally began disappearing from the house. By then, Daniel was facing lawsuits connected to concealed business debt and disputed loan, disclosures tied to the estate investigation. Relatives who once defended him stopped returning calls publicly. Others suddenly spoke about warning signs they claimed they had noticed for years. Even the neighbors changed. No one trimmed hedges while pretending not to watch anymore. People looked directly at me now with quiet recognition instead of polite avoidance. Scandal rearranges social honesty faster than grief ever does. Inside the house, the silence felt unfamiliar at first. Not empty, peaceful. I spent several afternoons restoring photographs Daniel had removed. Family portraits returned to hallway walls. My mother's garden picture went back beside the staircase. A framed photo of Dad teaching me to sand the cedar desk sat again, near the library window where it always belonged. But the strangest realization came slowly. I no longer needed the house emotionally. For years, I believed acceptance lived inside these rooms somewhere, hidden in holiday dinners, praise, inheritance conversations, or family rituals that never fully included me. But once the tension disappeared, the illusion disappeared with it. Grief remained. Resentment didn't. One rainy morning, a final probate envelope arrived inside the brass mailbox. This time, only my name appeared on the front. The final probate documents arrived on a quiet Thursday morning with no ceremony attached to them. Full legal ownership of the property transferred permanently into my name, effective immediately. I could keep the house, sell it, divide the proceeds, or walk away entirely. For several days, I said nothing. Then, 3 months later, I returned alone one final time before listing the property for sale. The house felt smaller without tension living inside it. Afternoon sunlight stretched across the hardwood floors, while the kitchen still carried the faint scent of coffee and cedar, polish buried deep into the walls after decades of mornings my parents once shared there. I walked room by room slowly, not grieving anymore so much as observing. The restored family photographs remained exactly where I placed them. The cedar desk stood again beside the library window, balanced, finished. Near the front hallway, I removed the original brass house key from my coat pocket. The metal felt warmer than I expected after all these months. For years, I thought ownership meant finally being chosen, but standing there alone, I realized peace and belonging were never the same thing. I placed the key gently onto the kitchen counter, beneath the framed photograph of my parents, taken long before money, pressure, and inheritance turned every room into negotiation. Outside, sunlight reflected brightly across the brass mailbox near the curb. My phone vibrated again with another unread message from Daniel. I didn't open it. I silenced the phone, picked up my coat, and walked out of the house without looking back. For the first time in years, leaving no longer felt like losing something.